What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Russia just made a move on Russia's Far East. While Vladimir Putin's army is bleeding out in Ukraine, another quiet invasion is unfolding thousands of kilometers away. And this time, there are no tanks, no explosions, no heroic speeches on state TV. Because the enemy is not NATO. It is supposed friend, China. For decades, Moscow presented the Far East as a fortress of Russian might. Untamed wilderness, endless resources, and proud frontier cities like Khabarovsk and Vladivostok standing at Russia's Pacific gate to the world. But now that Putin has drained the country's resources into the black hole of war, Beijing has silently stepped in to claim what it was always wanted: influence, land, and long-term control. No troops, no bullets, just contracts, so-called investments, and leases that might as well be just deeds of ownership. The regions bordering China, such as Amur, Khabarovsk, Primorye, are now more Chinese than Russian in everything but name. Xi Jinping did not invade, he just rented Russia for 50 years. And when the time passes, the tenant might very well be very reluctant to abandon his dwellings. It started kinda innocently enough, or at least that's how Moscow tried to sell it. Strategic partnership, quote-unquote, cross-border cooperation, mutual development of the Far East. All these are just fancy words for what in practice became the biggest land and resource grab in modern Russian history. Chinese companies began to invest in agriculture, logging and mining across the Amur and Primorye regions, areas that not so long ago the Kremlin considered too strategically sensitive for foreign presence. But when sanctions started biting and war expenses exploded, the government threw open the doors to anyone with cash. And well, guess who showed up first? First and the only one. The same neighbor that has been eyeing these territories since before the Bolsheviks were even born. The numbers tell much more precise story. In the last 3 years, conveniently right after war started, Chinese direct investments in the Russian Far East has increased by over 400%. Local officials brag about it as it is some kind of victory. They even cut ribbons, give speeches about brotherly friendship, and drink, obviously, vodka to new horizons. But these horizons are built on Chinese money, Chinese machines and Chinese labor. In the Amur region alone, more than 2 million hectares of farmland have been leased to Chinese corporations for 49 to 50 years, half a century. That's not a partnership, that's the annexation with a polite smile. And here's the fun part. Russians are barely part of it, regular people. The agreements usually stipulate that the investor provides not only equipment and expertise, but also labor. Translated basically that they bring their own workers. Entire villages now in the Far East now operate in Mandarin. The shops, construction sites, and even local farms are staffed among almost entirely by Chinese citizens. Local Russians, already underpaid and exhausted, are being pushed out of their own market, replaced in their own land. So they are forced either to sit quiet and do nothing, or move west in order to search for a better life, leaving even more territory to their friends to occupy. If this is not colonization 2.0, then what else is? Personally, I'm not complaining, I'm just stating the facts. Business is business. Chinese, Kazakh, Mongolians, whoever pays the bill gets the right? But I seriously doubt that after 50 years of beneficial exploitation, these foreign workers will just quietly pack their equipment and leave. Especially because in 50 years Putin will most likely not be even here, and next ruler probably will not be as feared by other countries, not by China. So why leave then? Extend the lease or who knows what else? In fact, the Far East has been part of Russia for less than 200 years, not that long considering thousands of years of history. And guess who owned those territories before? You guessed it. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. Let's take a short trip back in time. The Far East was not always Russian. In fact, much of it was Chinese until the mid-19th century. The 1858 Treaty of Augin and 1860 Treaty of Pekin handed these territories, including what is now Vladivostok, to the Russian Empire after China's humiliating defeat in the Opium Wars. For over 160 years, Beijing has quietly viewed these treaties as unequal agreements, forced upon them by a weakened Qing dynasty. Officially, China recognizes the current borders, but unofficially, the sentiment in Chinese academic circles and obviously nationalist forums is crystal clear. "We will reclaim our lost lands peacefully." Well, they were not lying about the peaceful part, at least not yet. Xi Jinping does not need to redraw the map. He is simply redrawing ownership. Through strategic so-called partnerships, Chinese state corporations now control the mining rights for gold, copper, rare earth metals across massive sections of the Russian Far East. Through agricultural development, they cultivate the same fertile land that Chinese emperors once considered sacred imperial territory. And through the so-called, quote-unquote, again, logistical cooperation, they manage entire segments of transport infrastructure, which is roads, railways, and ports. Remember how Russia once mocked Ukraine for being under the IMF, International Monetary Fund, control? Well, China did not give Russia any loans, it just gave it chains disguised as handshakes. Meanwhile, the demographic clock keeps ticking. The population of Russia's Far East has been shrinking for the last 3 decades straight. Since 1991, it lost more than 25, a quarter of its residents. Entire towns are emptying out, while on the other side of the border, in China's Heilongjiang province, since cities like Harbin or Mudanjing are booming. What used to be a natural frontier has become a demographic seesaw, one side collapsing, the other expanding. Beijing does not need to invade, it just needs to wait. And Putin, primarily drafting his soldiers from this specific far away from Moscow region, well, it definitely does not help his case. But why Russia even allowed such involvement of Chinese in their Far East? Isn't Putin crazy about sovereignty and borders? Let's talk about it in our next chapter. Let's be honest, Putin did not invite China to the Far East because he wanted friendship. He invited them because he had no choice. Sanctions, isolations, and the enormous cost of war have turned Russia into a junkie for Chinese cash. Moscow's entire survival strategy now depends on Beijing's goodwill, from selling oil at humiliating discounts to importing electronics and machine parts they cannot get anywhere else. And the Far East is the collateral. Here's the deal. China funds the infrastructure, builds the pipelines, extracts the minerals, and manages the logistics. Russia just simply signs off the paperwork and pretends it is in control. Except, as you would guess it is not. Take the Amur gas processing plant, for example, one of Gazprom's flagship projects near the Chinese border. Nearly every piece of equipment used there comes from China. The project's primary customers, also China. The profits, well, you already guessed who will take the lion's share. It's the kind of partnership where one partner does all the work and the other just pays with sovereignty and just expects that nobody notices. And yet, Russian officials still call this a success story. In their eyes, dependency is not humiliation, it is strategic cooperation, Putin's favorite phrase. They don't care about that most of the newly built infrastructure is designed to serve Chinese markets, not Russian ones. They don't care that Chinese banks dictate loan conditions or that Chinese inspectors oversee environmental compliance on Russian soil. Just crazy, right? What matters is that the paperwork looks good, acceptable. In a system built on appearances, substance is irrelevant. Not the first time, not the last time we prove it. Putin can call Xi Jinping his dear friend all he wants. The truth is, well, China turned Russia into its economic outpost. And the biggest irony, well, the same propaganda that once warned Russians about Western colonization now celebrates being colonized by the East. Every investment announcement is framed as proof that Russia is not isolated. They don't mention that these deals give China the right to export profit tax-free for decades, or that the so-called joint ventures usually have one Russian accountant for like 200 Chinese employees. Beijing's influence is not just economic, it's cultural, administrative, and creeping extremely closer to the political one. They are quietly, methodically, and without a single soldier crossing the border. The question is, what happens when the war ends? What will Russia find when it finally looks east again? Spoiler, not much left to claim. Because by the time Moscow finishes its disaster in Ukraine, the Far East might no longer belong to it in any meaningful sense. The infrastructure will be Chinese-owned, the mines are Chinese-operated, the population primarily Chinese-influenced, if not just Chinese alone. Even the ports could be controlled by joint ventures that answer more to Beijing than to Moscow. Locals already sense it, they feel it, they complain about it. In Khabarovsk, for example, resentment brews as residents watch Chinese workers dominate construction sites, while Russians are left unemployed in their own country. In Vladivostok, you can buy groceries in stores where the price tags are printed in Mandarin first, Russian second, if any Russian at all, and it is easier to even pay in yuan than in ruble. In Amur then, environmental activists complain about deforestation caused by Chinese logging companies that operate with impunity. But when they protest, local authorities shut them down, because those companies pay the region's bills, not the protesters who do nothing. The governor of Primorye is not worried about protests. He is worried about losing these foreign investors. He worries about losing money. Well, just translation, just don't buy the hand that feeds you, even if it's feeding literally on you. What about Beijing then? They're watching, testing, measuring how much they can take before Moscow reacts. And well, so far Moscow has not reacted at all, either by willing not reaction or just literally not noticing anything. Xi Jinping does not need war, he just needs patience. Empires fall in silence, not in flames. By 2040, when many of these 50-year leases reach their halfway point, Chinese economic dominance in the Far East will be irreversible. Russia may still hold them up, but the territory will answer to a different master. History will record this is not as a grand betrayal, but as a trade. Russia sold its land, resources, and sovereignty in exchange for survival. Xi did not need to conquer the Far East, he just waited for Russia to put it up for rent. The world might look at Ukraine as the battlefield, but the real victory, the quiet, permanent, and strategic one, is happening right now, thousands of kilometers to the east, under the radar, and under the red flag of the Middle Kingdom. Putin, who was once so afraid of being surrounded by enemies, ended up being pushed against the wall by his friends. Well, there you have it, guys. Happy weekends. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support what we do here on YouTube, there are links down below, PayPal donations, Patreon memberships, greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you much for watching. See you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell.